I'm Isla Berman. I am the new chair of architecture here at CCA. I'd like to welcome everyone to the City of the Future exhibition, the opening reception tonight, and a panel presentation and discussion. Tonight I'm going to give a short introduction to the competition and to the panel, and then I've asked each of the panelists to give a brief presentation of their projects. After which I'll be asking a series of questions to the panelists to open up a kind of broader discussion and then open it up to all of you in the audience. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for coming, and I want to especially thank Mark Donahue and Mona El-Kafif for curating and putting together the exhibition, and to all of the students, the CCA students who worked on getting that up in a very short period of time. Yeah. Great job. We've decided that we're going to take the exhibition afterwards, and because CCA is limited in facilities and office space, we're going to turn them on their sides and give all the faculty who don't have offices. And I also wanted to thank all of the panelists for being in the show and participating. We wanted to extend the venue that happened at the Ferry Building and to give more exposure to all the work that was done. During the last 2 years, the History Channel, IBM, and Infinity, and also partnering with AIA and the American Society of Civil Engineers, have challenged architects to envision the future of their cities. And they started with what they believe to be the most important cities in America. Last year was the first year that they did this, and they chose New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. And this year decided to do San Francisco, Washington, and Atlanta. 8 design firms are pre-selected and qualified to compete in each city, and the winning proposals are then entered into a final national competition to be decided by an online vote. I encourage all of you, I'm doing the plug today for Craig and Lisa, for Iwamoto Scott, because you all have to go onto the History Channel to vote online. It's a popular vote, and it basically comes from the support from the cities themselves. In the initial event in San Francisco, after having been pre-selected to participate in the competition, each of the 8 teams, in the true Iron Chef style, after having been pre-selected, they had 7 days. It would have taken 7 days to actually read the document that I think they were given. They had 7 days to prepare their proposals from start to finish. They had 3 hours to install their exhibition at the Ferry Building, and then 15 minutes to present. The presentation was at the Ferry Building here in San Francisco on January 20th of this year. In the San Francisco competition, Iwamoto Scott received the first grand prize award for their project HydroNet. Honorable mentions included 2 awards, the Infinity Extraordinary Design Award that was presented to Fougeron Architecture, and the IBM Innovation and Technology Award that was given to FAO Architecture. This exhibition tonight is of the design proposals of those teams selected to envision the city of San Francisco in the year 2108. It was a design challenge that was obviously intensified by the very compressed time period allotted for the development of each of the team's future urban visions. These projects represent an extremely diverse range of trajectories for San Francisco's virtual futures. From the post-apocalyptic primitive wilderness of if architecture, the seemingly happy, diverse, collective cultural organicism of Anderson, what I call the pragmatic utopian model of sustainable agricultural urbanism stacked in the vertical farms of Fougeron's proposal, or the utopian synthetic nature of Iwamoto Scott's nanotube rhizomatic network of algae farms and hydrogen-fueled hover cars. I'm always fascinated at these when we were setting up this room, and I was thinking we're so low tech here. It's amazing, but we can think high tech, and that's good. After these proposals, I'm now convinced that Cuthrenary architects believe in a new ethical future for large-scale political organizations and corporate infrastructural industries supporting geothermal energy, desalination and tidal turbines, and the Gelfand partners are very optimistic in believing in new possibilities for emergent urban life in the wake of the next great natural disaster. These proposals, in my mind, were incredibly optimistic and certainly gave me hope. These visions ask us to critically project our city into the many possible urban futures that have yet to be actualized for San Francisco 100 years from now. I'm going to begin by briefly introducing the members of the panel and the firms and teams that they're representing tonight, rather than introducing each one as they come up and do their presentations. I'm going to introduce the whole panel at once. It's going to be a dense but quick evening. First, to my right is Anne Fougeron of Fougeron Architecture. Their project was called Cultivating the Urban Utopia. Fougeron Architecture is a nationally recognized design firm whose work exhibits a strong commitment to clarity of thought, design integrity, and the quality of the architectural detail. The firm presents itself as decidedly modernist. That's why the towers are rectilinear. In its dedication to finding the perfect alignment between architectural ideas and built form, focusing on the quality of light, materiality, and the innovative use of structure. Next to Anne is Craig Scott from Iwamoto Scott Architecture. Their project was called HydroNet. Iwamoto Scott is a San Francisco-based practice formed by Lisa Iwamoto and Craig Scott. Their work centers on amplifying the perceptual performance of architecture through strong environmental and site relationships, synthetic form, and the innovative use of materials. As a practice committed to pursuing architecture as a form of applied design research, ISAR engages in projects at multiple scales and in a variety of contexts and venues, including full-scale fabrications, museum installations and exhibitions, theoretical proposals, competitions, and commission design projects. Next to Craig, as we move down from my right, is Lisa Gelfand from Gelfand Partners. Their project was called Third Life. Gelfand Partners was founded in 1997. It's a San Francisco-based design office. They use a rigorous collaborative process, creating sustainable, functional, inspiring projects that serve the public interest. They've received numerous awards for their environmentally sensitive and interdisciplinary practice. Next to Lisa is Byron Kuth from Cuthrenary Architects. Their project was called Folding Water. Cuthrenary is a progressive architecture and urban design firm at the forefront of, I've been told, deep green building practices. Byron Kuth and Liz Ranieri established Cuthrenary in 1990. The firm has earned a national reputation for innovative commercial, institutional, residential, and urban design proposals that integrate current cultural discourse with contemporary issues of design, technology, and environmental awareness. Next to Byron is Jill Stoner from IF Architecture. Their project was called Wilderness City. IF may stand for Imagining the Future. IF Architecture is a collaboration of educators, architects, engineers, writers, and naturalists who speculate on the future reciprocities between cities and wilderness and on the aesthetic and ecological implications of these shifting relationships. Next to Jill is Peter Anderson of Anderson Architecture. Their project was called Bay Towers of Babylon. Anderson is an award-winning design firm that was founded in 1984 by partners Mark and Peter Anderson. With strong experience in residential, institutional, commercial work, and also prefabricated building systems, the firm collaborates a lot with manufacturers and construction professionals to both experiment within and expand the boundaries of traditional architectural practice. And at the very end is Peter Pfau. Peter Pfau is of Pfau Architecture. He and his partner Dwight Long produced City Organism. The firm was founded in 1991. It's an 18-person San Francisco-based design firm whose work is a continuous exploration into experimental technologies in the application and assembly of building materials and its effect on the experience of architectural space. Please join me in welcoming the panel, and I'm going to ask them to present. We're going to do these presentations one by one, so if I can get Anne Fugeron to come up and do the first presentation.
All right, now I'm going to have to learn how to use PowerPoint, which is never my forte. Is it up? No, not yet. Okay. Just hit that slideshow thing right now. Okay, there we go. Good. We worked on this project and sort of set for ourselves a parameter which we called cultivating the urban utopia, which actually utopia is a word that means a kind of idealistic environment, but in a real place, as opposed to utopia. What we were interested in, and quite quickly, was sort of to begin to sort of explore. How do you? All right. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. I went too fast. One of the things that we were very interested in is this idea of food, and maybe because we are in San Francisco after all, and the culture of food is so important here. But this was a problem to us that seemed very pressing and was something that could be addressed by the year 2008. By 2008, there will be 10 billion people living in this world. As of 2008, throughout the world, about 80% of the land on which we grow food is now already cultivated. So the real question is, where will we find the land that we need to be able to feed ourselves? By 2040, 80% of this world's population will reside in urban centers. This is going to push the agricultural land even further away from where the cities are and also densify these cities. So the question is, how will we feed ourselves? And as you can tell, these deadlines are pretty fast. I mean, 2040 is not very far away. America imports $52.5 billion of agricultural products every year, and every piece of food that we eat, or most of them, travel an average of 1,726 miles on average from farm to supermarket. And you can imagine the environmental impact of all these things. So when we realized this, we also talked about the population of the Bay Area, the agricultural footprint that we call it. It takes 6.1 acres of land to grow enough food for one person. And the reality of this is that it would take the entire state of California to feed California, which clearly isn't going to work as a paradigm. So what we wanted to talk about is this idea of urban agriculture, and the idea that if it's something that we take seriously today, maybe 100 years from now, we actually have a chance of actually being able to address this problem. And it starts with the first revolution was Alice Walters, and hopefully this would be the second. And I'm moving through this quickly because we have 5 minutes. So anyway, urban agriculture is what this is about. We felt that urban agriculture was possible in San Francisco in really 3 ways. It would be possible through roof gardens, clearly, which are already becoming very popular everywhere in the world. It would be possible through underground farms, and then finally through agricultural towers. The roof gardens, I think, are self-explanatory, of course. Solar and everything else, they allow for kind of great agricultural space. The underground place is really all the spaces left over by all the spaces are now occupied by cars in cities that will no longer be needed when cities are actually banned from the downtowns and probably from most cities, which I think will probably happen certainly in the next 100 years. So there's already examples of basically underground farming that's happening in Japan that's been actually much more successful than they'd even anticipated. Again, gray water and wind turbines could generate all the power needed for these. But really, these 2 methods aren't good enough to feed all of San Francisco. They'd only maybe provide about 10% of the food that we would need. So pioneered, reusing an idea that's been pioneered by Desponier, which is a biologist at Columbia, we wanted to investigate the idea of agricultural towers. The agricultural towers are basically vertical ways of growing food that rely on hydroponics, and they would allow you with a footprint of about 250 by 300 square feet, 250 by 300 to feed about 50,000 people. 200 such towers in the Bay Area could feed 10 million, basically. There's a lot of advantages to these, but you can ask me questions later on. The idea is to really close the food loop and to get rid of the 1,726 miles that food travels. And then the idea was to take the bay, the inside bay, and to see what would happen as we develop these towers over time in 50 years, in 70 years, and finally in 100 years, and to create this incredible network that would completely reinvigorate this whole Bay Area, allowing it to become an environment that was about kind of agricultural production as well as a place to live and sort of a kind of new life. So that was really the idea. The agricultural towers rely on a pier system, there's restored wetlands, there's increased urban density, and of course a sustainable transportation network. And then just some images of how we thought the system could work with a pier system that included pedestrian transportation as well as water treatment and utilities. And finally the towers themselves and how they actually operate, which again I can go into more detail later, and just an image of what these towers would be like sitting out in the piers as well as along the waterfront in San Francisco, where land that is kind of now abandoned could be reclaimed.
It's good.
Oh, I get a different screen here.
I'd
Sorry.
like to say yes to that, but
I know that's tricky in this space. Actually, I remember when James Turrell talked here, of all people whose work is all about light, the lights couldn't get turned down. I'm Craig Scott of Iwamoto Scott Architecture. HydroNet is the name of our project. This statement was one of the provocations for us from Gabriel Metcalf of Spur, the notion that the Bay Area is more than a region and perhaps a mega region beyond the 9 counties that are typically considered the Bay Area to possibly even include Sacramento. And that's happening now, so within 100 years from now, we thought it would certainly be happening. So our project is thought of as a small part of a larger network that could start to resolve these problems of sprawl and density and infrastructure. And in doing so, it would manage the flows of power, water, and the movement of people. And I'm not going to read, these are actually part of our display out there, so I'm not going to read these word for word. We put them up so that the kind of generative concepts could be clear. But basically, that this network would be subterranean and connect to nodal points at the surface, and it would simultaneously collect and store water and power, and as I mentioned, move traffic and the flow of vehicles beneath the city. The way we imagined it would be built is with automated drilling robots, and already there are methods of tunneling that are quite incredible at this stage. For instance, how the tunnel was built between Great Britain and Europe. And our presumption was that that technology would only get more advanced, and that the robots that would produce this tunneling tunneled infrastructure would actually be forming the walls of the tunnel as they drill, and that those walls would be formed of nanotube construction. This is a diagram of the Bay Area region, not quite the mega region, but where the nodes of this network were established by a combination of population density and a kind of intensification of that, and existence of geothermal and water sources. And the idea being that it works on the logistics of kind of network connectivity. The diagram on the right being an example of a non-scalar logic of connectivity, which scientists and engineers are looking in different walks of life, whether it be social networks or cyberspace or the flows of traffic or the growth of cities, that they're finding these incredible kind of bottom-up logics beneath these complex structures. This was kind of the key ideogram or diagram behind the project, and in a kind of zoomed in way to San Francisco in particular, but being this competition focusing specifically on the city of San Francisco, we of course had to zoom in. And what we found something really interesting, which was the presence of this giant aquifer in our research under the city. And so tapping into that, tapping into the resource of fog along the coast on the west side of the city, and then this proposed new zone of aquaculture and algae farming on the eastern bay shore. This diagram talks to the kind of energy exchange that would allow, the bringing together of water and hydrogen from the existing conditions and the proposed network that ties them together. So some quotes from, kind of supporting this vast amount of resources beneath the ground from San Francisco's Clean Little Secret, speaking to how much water is in fact down there, and even that BART currently pumps a bunch of water out of the tubes, the BART tubes under the city, straight into the sewer system. So the blue figure there is the form of the aquifer that holds these millions of gallons of water flowing beneath our feet. And we proposed that by repaving the streets with a porous pavement, that aquifer would continually be recharged from storm runoff. Algae already is being looked at as a source of hydrogen. The potential of even genetically modifying it to get more hydrogen potential out of it is being looked into. So this green in the diagram here is the area of baylands that would be flooded by a 3-meter rise in water predicted by global climate change. And so we thought the inundated baylands could be remade essentially as this new algae-producing aquaculture zone, which then would be fed into the hydrogen production. And so the network is about bringing together that algae production with, as well, a kind of a whole other vast resource beneath the city. And Northern California in particular is very suited for geothermal energy. So the idea being that the network combines these resources. And we really thought of this as the History Channel provided these DVDs as 2 episodes from the Cities of the Underworld series that's happening this fall, but that we were inspired by the spaces beneath cities all over, based on just the layering of history and the occurrence of these layers beneath the ground. And we were thinking about this, the nodes and spaces of this hydronite is really offering a new kind of urban condition, and that would also allow the potential preservation of much of above ground San Francisco alongside a kind of organic evolution of San Francisco's character. This is a map of it across the city, and I'll just I'll click through these, which you can see on your own. But the way we decided to model it was to represent this with a transparent model beneath the topography rendered as a series of plexiglass ribs, and a side view starts to show the connections between the above and the below ground. The eastern edge of the city along the bay where this aquaculture zone occurs, 3D printed model back when the LEDs worked. They burned out since a couple weeks ago. And this diagram is kind of important, which sets up the layering of this and structuring of the project. So the initial points we located were wells that used to exist in San Francisco. There was a time when people tapped into these aquifers. There are wells in a distributed pattern, as well as key points of transportation nodes. So that bottom layer is a Delaunay, what's called a Delaunay triangulation connecting those points. And then growing up off of that, and that sponsors the hydronet itself. Then growing up off of that are these connectors, or cilia as we called them, and ultimately the above ground interventions that tap into that and kind of form a symbiotic system together with it. This is the actual components of the hydronet tunnel system and some of the makeup of it, involving the robotic drilling, the nanotube structuring, the algae production. We're kind of fascinated by this idea of bioluminescent farming and aquaculture, which is being kind of explored already. Basically glow-in-the-dark mushrooms and fish and so on. So a section through from the ocean to the bay is a way that we could represent the various elements of the system. And zooming into that along the western coast, along Ocean Beach, basically is what we call the ocean fringe, which included a new form of housing and these beach islands which occur with the rising water levels. Aquifer hub, which taps in to the aquifer, which you can see clearly beneath the ground there. A rendering of that area with the big piece at the bottom we nicknamed the fog flower, and there are a series of these distributed around. And the green it's difficult to represent it underground, but with this kind of transparent method, that was the attempt. It's not on top of the city, but beneath the city. A view from the old Sutro Baths and Cliff House, and a kind of re-inhabitation of that site with the new 22nd century version of a spa hotel. And the other building higher up is what we nicknamed the geothermal mushroom. And in the distance, the algae towers rising up. So it's further on in that section, this positions some of those pieces relative to the topography. I've just mentioned the fog flower and geothermal mushroom. These things we thought would sponsor kind of new programmatic conditions and be key connectors between this underground network and the above world. And the land portal is a series of smaller scale, essentially like subway stop conditions, but places to connect without necessarily a large above ground architecture. Just quickly, some renderings of some of these fog flowers near Sutro Tower, Bernal Hill with its geothermal mushroom growing out of it. A couple more of them up at Twin Peaks and emerging from the fog spilling over Twin Peaks, and a view back towards downtown from Twin Peaks down Market Street. And finally, at the bay's edge, where the section cuts through that aquaculture zone with the algae towers and this sky portal. Basically, we're assuming this hover car traffic would be diverted underground at the periphery of the city and would not be allowed to occupy the airspace above the city. But the city streets would still have some slower modes of transport on them. We weren't proposing the eradication of cars or well, whatever. I mean, we imagined things like hovering segways or things that move slower and wouldn't have such a problem with pedestrians, that they could coexist with pedestrians. And this is just wrapping up with some of the final views. The algae towers, which we envisioned as being a form of housing, the coexistence of housing of people and growing of algae. And this is a view kind of from the dashboard of a hover car about to dive into the sky portal. And then a couple views from underneath at these key node points. This is our revisioning of Embarcadero, beneath the Embarcadero, and Mission Bay, where here there's a kind of speculation on this new kind of mixing of program in some of these nodes with the thermal bath coexisting with the flow of these hover cars. And finally, a view of the hydronet, a kind of worm's eye view from underground. Thank you.
So while I'm fiddling with this, I want to thank CCA for hosting this, and thank all of you for coming. And since I don't use a Mac, where's the thing that you double click? That's them, so then, whoops.
Oh,
So
sorry.
Escape that. So that's that one. So for our office, this was really it was great fun because we work right downtown in what is really the Tenderloin, and we work all the time on just what San Francisco can be as a basically is a really diverse place. And we started out with just our love for the city and the thought that really what we've got here is always apples and oranges. We always have all these juxtapositions of people and places, ages of things, nature and the city. And that is something that we would like to see preserved. So we did assume that there would be a great earthquake. We took the likelihood of the earthquake and we took the likelihood of rising waters and said, right, there's going to be a big disaster, and that's great because it gives us the opportunity to rethink things. So as you know, probably the last time that happened and Burnham tried to rethink it, nothing happened. We rebuilt. But this time we're going to say that we're really going to rethink it, and we're actually going to rebuild a city that is responsive to the place where it is. So it's responsive both in a way that, for instance, here, you look at the Filbert Steps, and we have things that just clash right into each other, and that's one of the charms of the city. We also have things that clash right into each other, and that's one of the dangers of the city. So what we assume, though, is that with all this happening, and that this big rising waters thing, not only will it drown the bay and many of the areas that surround the bay, but will also make hundreds of millions of people around the world homeless. That, in fact, those people, as they move around, we're going to get, we hope, we will welcome, even after our earthquake, some of these people, and they will join us, and we will become even more diverse than we are today. So if you look at what will happen to San Francisco, this is just a mere 3-meter rise of waters, and it returns Mission Bay to being Mission Bay. We also find that the bay itself is a tremendous natural resource for the entire Pacific, and that as an estuary, it's responsible for spawning and for the fishery of the entire Pacific. So we would actually like to see basically a reconstruction of the bay as the natural feature that it needs to be for a large part of the west coast of North America. And we would like to respond to what is, in fact, underneath San Francisco. So we started to look at what's really different between the west and the east. This is a 1913 geological map, and that really hasn't changed very much. We have sand, water, and fog on the and wind on the west side, and we have rock, water, and city on the east side. And we have places where we can build safely and places where it's always going to be difficult. So what we proposed was that we would, in fact, increase the density of the city, probably double it to 1.5 million people, and that would enable us to take in a lot of the people that are coming in from outlying areas. We would also be able to excavate the bays, and we'll bring water right back into the center of the city. And that diversity, this is everybody in my office, I'd like to thank them. They just reflect the kind of city that we hope that we will see, lots of different kinds of people. And we will be rebuilding a city that's larger and more dense, but that likes to live in lots of different kinds of places. So some people like to live in high-rise buildings, some people like little houses. We think that the city should continue to offer, or should offer even more choice as it goes forward. And that you should be able to get around, see your friends, and get across the bay in more than one place. So we have a new Bay Bridge. And that just as the city invented the cable car to get up and down the hills before, that we now have sort of maglev transportation and things like that, that would enable us to put high densities of people on top of Twin Peaks and still get mass transit up there. Our thought was really that energy is all around us and that we should stop thinking in a 20th century way about factories and centralized power plants and just think about what we can get out of the sun and the wind that's right next to us, as all, most living beings do. And that this is what we really need to learn. So just as your bones can tell when pressure happens and make a charge, so can nanotubes, so can a lot of other things. You don't need factories, you don't need distribution networks. You can actually do this right where you need the energy. And we can just take, for instance, here's the nanotube again. It's made out of carbon. Hopefully we can get some little creatures that will start to sequester the carbon out of the atmosphere, just as they do in coral reefs, and that's going to help regularize the climate all over the world, and it's also going to give us building materials. So what we look at is how we would actually be able to take the city and basically read the book of nature. For us, the most powerful metaphor was to say, okay, how do, in fact, living beings come together and have ongoing, thousands of year kinds of occupations in systems that work? And how would we be able to do that in a city that actually provided homes for all kinds of people, provided all kinds of lives for all kinds of people, and was able to continue without ripping off either nature or other cities or other places or each other? That is what we call third life for San Francisco. Thank you. You're on fire.
Hey, while I was getting this up, I was impressed with the fact you had the photographs of the folks in your office that had worked on this, and I'd say between the 7 offices up here at the table, there is really a small army out there of people that pull together these images and projects and exhibitions. And so I really want to extend a heartfelt thanks to all the people out there that were part of the offices and part of the group that assembled these projects. It was an extraordinary undertaking. I think, as I mentioned, there was just a week's time which has had to be accomplished. So thank you very much.
No, that's not the one that it's not going to get what I want. And this. Nope. That's all right. Oh, we will get there. Okay. Nope, it's not leaving that mode. Somebody There's a button that says help. If I just push that, does someone magically appear?
No.
You sure this isn't?
Okay,
It's just.
got it.
You know, Isla had mentioned all the submissions were sort of optimistic, and I think there's an intention to that, because when we look out at 100 years into the future, what we want to be able to really do is find a vehicle to evaluate and reflect back on our own current times. So I think all of the projects in this particular exhibit were really looking for an equivalency and trying to discover something about our current time and place. For us, San Francisco is this endlessly fascinating place, and I think we wanted to find something intrinsic about the place, and I think we were looking at the economics and the culture of the city, trying to understand the sort of paradoxes and contradictions within that community, and just how those cultural forces, cultural and social forces, really ultimately begin to shape the physical place of cities. And so that was pretty much the central area of our inquiry. I think for us, the idea that cities grow very much in an incremental and kind of an innate way. They have an essential kind of physical DNA that then is affected by these kind of cultural and economic forces. So for us, what we want to do is not necessarily present a predetermined or a prescriptive kind of set of patterns or urban directives, but to kind of set up an armature or a kind of guide for how these forces that currently exist in our own time would play out over across the course of 100 years. Now, let's see if I can get this working up here. All right. So basically, you know, what we did was to move away from the grid itself of the city and introduce a kind of an independent, specific and autonomous sort of intervention. And that is in the form of like a 12-mile seawall that actually keeps the rising sea levels at bay and sustains the current status of the ecological area of the bay, as well as, in addition to that, kind of recognizing that there are other forces which are moving out and into a kind of a globalization. So we work to try and reconcile those contradictions within the sort of force of the community. There's a kind of a basic recalibration of a global order. We're trying to see how San Francisco plays out within that particular sort of space-time continuum, and how San Francisco then emerges as a center of a new global community. But then there's a kind of recognition, in addition to this sort of trend towards almost a hyper-globalization, there's a hyper-regionalism. There's, you know, an attention to what these specific and regional identities contribute to the full spectrum of a global culture. So San Francisco finds itself, as expressed in some of the earlier presentations, you know, at the hub of a very delicate ecological system and hydrological system within the state of California. So it's basically serving a watershed that stretches from Sacramento all the way down to LA. So we said, well, we're going to kind of give the Bay an opportunity to fulfill its current destiny. And so whether development is rather intense or whether it's a light, we're saying that we're using the what we call the fold to keep at bay the rising sea levels. We also have introduced at the top part of this diagram a consolidation of transportation and energy that is integrated in with this particular infrastructural intervention. So I think we just determined that, in this, you know, when you read reports, that we're not going to be able to extricate ourselves from our current kind of carbon-based energy paradigms, and so we are headed towards either a slow catastrophe or maybe a precipitous one, but we are counting on, as all these projects have, a substantial rise in sea levels. So what we've done is looked at the bridges and some of the kind of solutions that the city's put forward, and how these singular and large infrastructural elements can actually transform the communities and connections that these projects make, or the city makes. So essentially, we've added a new family member to these collection of infrastructural elements. And then just to talk a little bit about the nature of this piece and how we really envisioned it, is we saw it as just a fold. And so as a scribe on the bay. In that sense, there's an introduction of the horizontality of the expanse of the bay, and trying to understand physically what is memorable and significant about the place. And then embedded within that fold, we looked at trying to augment the kind of regionality, which is to say the energy independence, the kind of bio-regionalism, the commitment to the current conditions of how the bay functions. And so we're looking at high-speed transit to accommodate new population, as well as geothermal plants. I think there was some recognition earlier on about the kind of sites that we sit on, this huge geothermal reserves beneath the city at the current time, as well as using that energy for desalination plants and tidal turbines. So then that kind of leads us out to this element that in our thinking connects San Francisco up to a much broader community and kind of fulfills the forces that we see at play here. And in some ways we almost perceive that there's a transformation of how we approach global problems. And what's interesting about global warming, it draws us immediately into a unified global community, because that's the only way this can be solved. And we begin to see lots of problems emerging that can only be solved in this fashion, that there's got to be a full kind of collaboration and cooperation between communities. So we're looking at, say, organizations like the UN to say, this is a networked community that looks at global problems and becomes almost an autonomous world nation, as it were. And then one of these hubs, would be inevitably stationed here in San Francisco. And then from that would be a kind of a development from housing and cultural events, sports, the kinds of programming that would go into this new global hub, which is in essence about transportation. So we're really looking at airport cities, which is a whole new emerging typology, particularly in Asia. And then we're looking at how that comes back and then integrates and commingles with a regional culture. So we're curious about what would occur when these cultures are strand and entwined. So I think one of our earlier interests in this project was what types of new and unprecedented civic spaces could emerge from this sort of commingling of cultures and economies. And those are some macro views, and ultimately, I think, I don't know if I can get this movie to launch here in this format. It's not going to happen. There it goes. All right. So anyway, just thinking about how what cities are really about, what really makes them truly memorable is how they're experienced. And so again, we were curious about the public realm and the new opportunities for the public realm. And in many instances, it will be a mobile public realm. So some of these, the story we basically invented was a fellow from Bangkok who's flying into the city. He's got a 10 o'clock meeting with a San Francisco kind of local person. And so these are sort of the two paths to the meeting in this new global hub out at the edge of the Pacific edge. So here's our global fellow. And what occurred to us, which is important, is that San Francisco remain as it is, because the kind of terms for this new economy, for the new centrifugal forces towards these towns, is not a currency that's based on the movement of goods, but it's really based on innovation, ideas, organization, And so we see San Francisco as emerging as an important hub for that kind of activity. And so from there was a mixture of these traditional and existing spaces that we know and understand, are very attached to, and also some unprecedented experiences and collaborations and communications. All right, they hooked up. It's a 10 o'clock meeting. He got there. All right. I didn't think with this technology we were going to quite get there. So anyway, thank you very much. This is a presentation.
So again, while Isla is getting things set up, we actually started this project by writing a narrative to see what could be the story of allowing us to visualize a future 100 years from now. And one of the uniquenesses of San Francisco is its voting habits and voting power. We just voted yesterday. Some of the issues are local ones. So what we did was we constructed a set of ballot measures by decade, moving us forward from this year to 100 years from now, and used those ballot measures as a way to then start to imagine visually what that future time might be. And the first of the ballot measures is the Zoo Closure Act, passed 2 years from now based on the events of Christmas 2007. And a couple of years later, the Permeable Ground Initiative, which calls for certain neighborhoods to designate streets that would be unpaved and given over to agriculture. And then the largest and most influential of the ballot measures, the 2020 referendum on nature, which asks, shall San Francisco adopt a comprehensive new philosophy of urbanism that transforms the classical relationship of the city to wilderness from one of opposition to one of integration? This includes rejecting what would then be the nationally dominant paradigm of the wildlife corridor, which is now starting to be instituted and talked about across the country, to one that marginalizes the majority of species or restricted swaths of land, and the replacement with the concept of the human corridor, which will govern the development of San Francisco into the next century. Sorry, it's not.
It's different what you're saying.
It's different. How do I go back? So, this is the wilderness city, traced to the referendum that I just read. The wilderness city is about giving up the ground and starting to establish a new concept of the ground elevated above what we normally think of as the ground plane. The paradigm of life in the wilderness city is propelled by deep instincts for survival. And here we make the assumption that the changes that are happening are not changes based on technology or needs, but changes that are actually based on a shift in our consciousness and a shift in what we imagine we need to a different kind of desire that celebrates the integration of our life with the life of animals and plants. The necessary sequel to what we now think of as green architecture is what we might call blue urbanism, an image of the city embedded in mediums of water and sky. And once again, I think we might be missing some images. This happened in the last PowerPoint too, and the images are actually on the disk that we gave you, Isla, so I'm not sure why they don't translate to a Mac. They are actually out in the lobby, so it's a little bit frustrating to have this happen again. This is an image of the old city, what we call the old city, which is the current financial district, with the waters having risen and transformed the street level into a wetland. And this, the Sunset District, where what we're calling a new urban typology of the Strand, densely packed towers that form these thin human corridors, start to operate in places like Sunset Boulevard, where we have now a very low density and would then become a very highly dense strand of tall buildings. I wish I could just put the disc in.
It's in my office, so.
So the strands are the primary architectural manifestation of what we're calling this human corridor, and they can be visualized occurring in what we call the highly inscribed lines that currently move through the city. So the major one that we developed is along the 101 and I-80 corridor from the Bay Bridge toward the airport, and which actually begins with one Rincon Tower, which was just finished this year. So you can see the diagram on the right in terms of how this strand of building might actually start to follow the highway. The strands in different parts of the city would embrace certain kinds of technologies for, as many others have also said, the harvesting of fog, and the elevated public spaces would start to be generated also as water-catching permeable grounds. This is an image of some what we call very early fog catchers in the current financial district that might be built somewhere in the 2030s. High up in the strands are these elevated ground planes, which we're calling the plats, which actually align with the hills of San Francisco and are named for the hills, such that in giving up the ground topography to the wilderness, we reestablish those same points of view within the strands. So we have the Telegraph Plat in the Old City aligning with Telegraph Hill, the Pacific Plat in the Sunset Strand lining up with Pacific Heights, Twin Plats high up in the Bay Strand aligning with Twin Peaks. Our idea is that not only do these strands exist within the wilderness landscape, but the building fabric itself in the sort of composition of its section also starts to be permeable and to allow other kinds of smaller wildlife and plant life to actually filter into the tower itself. So the porosity starts to welcome in the architectural detailing crows, vultures, ravens, falcons. So we also made a series of maps of the city that start to show how the changes might happen. I think these also are not going to show up. In the Sunset Strand, such that that land can become part of the public domain. The Golden Strand Extension Initiative, the Golden Strand is imagined to be between Golden Gate Park and Geary Boulevard, and to actually take on the park as a kind of extension of the facade of the building, so that the park would start to go up into the facade, and the Strand would then extend toward downtown. And finally, the Bay Strand continuation proposal would propose that the strand of building that is now begun by One Rincon Tower would accumulate and grow not only to the limits of San Francisco, but onward down toward the airport and beyond. And the model is actually conceived as a dual language. The wooden part of the model, which you'll see out in the lobby, is the existing topography of the city, and the strands are deliberately built as transparent sort of clusters of rods representing the bundled towers that exist in a completely different idiom. And then the plats are again introduced as thin pieces of wood, which starts to reinterpret and replace the ground that's being given up below. Thank you.
Okay. No, I think I got it. Thank you all for having us here. This is a great experience and opportunity. We had a lot of fun working on this project. What I want to do, I'm going to go through this very quickly because I do want to leave time for discussion. But I hope that a lot of you had a chance to see the project that we designed, the Bay Towers of Babylon, outside here, and a lot of the information that is central to our ideas is embedded within the project itself. There's text all over the project to explain it. The thing that I wanted to focus on here is that when we planned this project, we were looking ahead 100 years and thinking we could, as individual architects, impose some grand utopian scheme on the project, but the reality of the politics of San Francisco is that's probably not really going to happen. So we really focused on a concept of what could we do working within the fabric of the city of San Francisco to create a building of the future and the city of the future. What really strikes us about San Francisco is that it's a very unique city with a combination of a very strong collective social ambition paired up with fierce protection of individual freedom. And those two things together, I think, absolutely define the city of San Francisco. And ultimately, that was what we wanted to work with on our project. So instead of designing the overall building, we wanted to design an armature on which the city could act and could develop its own in its own only in San Francisco kind of way. So our focus was not on the surface finishes, but on the infrastructural possibilities. So just looking at the city, the basic structure of what we're proposing is that there would be armatures built for every neighborhood of the city. The neighborhoods are all so different, so unique, and require such different responses, but at the same time, they all have the same needs, the same infrastructure needs for energy, power distribution, heating and cooling, urban urban amenities. They all have the same needs. So we worked on kind of a prototypical tower infrastructure that would be put into the city, and then from there the parts would plug into this infrastructure, so that each individual would be able to build small parts that attach onto the infrastructure, and every neighborhood would continue to be different and differentiated by the characteristics of what gets built there. So in our proposal there, the one tower is one large version of the many small towers of infrastructure that we propose to put throughout the city, but the images of the objects and the buildings are not our projection of what we would place there, but of what we think will organically grow out of the process that is San Francisco. So I just wanted to say a few things about the idea of the infrastructure, because there's a very deep level of research and thought that is involved for us in planning this infrastructure. You don't even see any of this in the finished product, which is just fine with us, but the concept is that these towers would be built out of simple prefabricated steel structural pieces that could be built off-site, brought to the site, and assembled in very kind of simple, prototypical ways. The form, the overall shape of the structures, these armatures, react to the solar orientation and the kind of natural forces of the city. So if you see, the towers are kind of offsetting in both in plan and in section to get the winter sun into the units and shield themselves from the summer sun. So the buildings are also very porous, or the armature allows for very porous buildings that brings the airflow through the structures for natural ventilation between the units. The idea of the great increase in density is that at the ground level, the neighborhoods could stay the way they primarily are. They can go on developing, continuing to keep aspects of the city at the ground level, but we'll have many more people living in the city by increasing the density, moving up into these towers. So we have a system of streets within the towers themselves. These two images show the difference from winter to summer, and kind of explain the reason for the curved enclosing form of the towers themselves. And the idea here of the wind flow going through the buildings, helping to allow for natural ventilation within the structure of the buildings. So even though the exterior of the buildings are intended in the model to represent fun exuberance, they are our projection of what would happen, not by an individual architect, but by the great collective work of the group of the city that will put together this vision of the future. And the exuberance of that is our toast to the city of San Francisco. It's the exuberance of a city that, again, has collective social ambition and a great deal of independent freedom. So we think that the city of the future will be built up out of all of these pieces, but the infrastructure will be a result of the very strong and positive collective social ambition of the city. So you can see more details of the if you read all the little tags. It'll take you hours to do that, but that's okay. That's part of the idea. It's embedded with a lot of information. It's embedded with a lot of history, but it's not nostalgic for the history. It's building on the past of the city, but it's very much living in the present. So that's our project. Thank you.
think the technological pause is important.
Gives you a moment to think about each presentation.
Okay. I'm Peter Fow. My partner, Dwight Long, is sitting right over there, and so during the questions, make sure to include him as well. I think this challenge for us was, pretty intense to take on thinking about the city as a whole in a single week. And what we became interested in very quickly was thinking about the increased density of the city we know and love, and imagining every block choked with cars, that there's no way you can quadruple the size of the city and still have it function. So the challenge that was put to us by the History Channel was to think about infrastructure. And we began to think, well, maybe there's an infrastructure that can banish the individual automobile, that the future has no individual automobiles. And that was ironic because there was a member of the jury who was representing Nissan Design Department, but tough luck for him. So what we began to look at is, okay, well, what kind of infrastructure could basically make it possible not to have the individual automobile? And so we speculated a kind of underground infrastructure that had a subway system that could basically pop up everywhere within, you'd never have to walk more than a block and a half to get to a subway system. And so that could get you around the city pretty well. And then the problem is, we put our groceries in the back of our car, and how can you carry that around the subway system? So we invented the idea that there is a materials delivery system using micro-tunneling technology that forms a grid under the city with robots in it that take your groceries from wherever you get them, you pop them in this little system, and they're within a block of your house when you get home, so that everything can basically be transported around the city. And then suddenly what happens is that the 7,000 acres of real estate dedicated to the automobile paradigm suddenly becomes available to the city to think about a new kind of city. So you can see here there's a system that we developed for the overall grid where every third street becomes a kind of service street. And that service street would be a place where public transportation and limited access could occur to kind of move the big stuff around, like beds and things like that. And then the other streets become a series of linked green ramblas, so to speak. And the major streets that are currently dedicated to the automobile become sort of pedestrian links throughout the city. And then layered between those are streets that belong to the neighborhoods that could become recreational spaces or places to have cafes outdoors and so forth. And so here you can see a kind of network of the green streets that would develop from that. And so Market Street becomes a big pedestrian rambla. We joked that we would have a bronze statue of Newsom here. I don't know if we actually got that in there. The other streets become community gardens, so that the whole nature of the city that we experience at the ground level is transformed. And so once we'd undertaken that, we began to think about the issues of how to actually accommodate this density that would result. And the idea was to take each of these transit portals that we had created and to zone a kind of density around those transit portals, and then begin to look at how that might inform the morphology of the city. So the idea was that in each neighborhood there are different kinds of resources that can be harvested and kind of combined to drive the overall city. So wind, tide, sun, all affect different parts of the city and create different microclimates that each of these density forms, we call them ecoforms, could respond to. And so we began to look at those. First one here is the marina, which is reclaimed by a higher water level. And then the entire density that used to be spread out in the marina is accommodated in a much smaller footprint of higher density. And a raised marina green is created on top of that. And a series of extensions of the infrastructure create kind of tidal harvesting resources, and salinization plants harvest water and pump that into the system. So here you can see the tidal energy, things at the end of these pedestrian links out in the bay. The idea that it kind of tiers up into the city, in this case where the morphology of the city is about the hills behind having views over below. This is kind of a flat ecoform. And then moving to the sunset, there's a greater density and a series of towers that harvest the wind, and fog catchers at the ocean that harvest the fog and put those in big cisterns underneath, and those become part of a closed loop that connects to the mission. And so you can see the infrastructure here connecting and delivering the water to the mission, where we're proposing, because of the microclimate, urban agriculture, which combines commercial farms, local neighborhood farming, and rooftop individual farming. And the idea was that 47% of the food eaten in the city would be grown in the city, and then the water would then be pumped back full cycle out to living machines at the end of the lines in the Sunset District. And so all the resources for the city would be shared throughout the infrastructure in the city. And that's basically it. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the panel. I had originally asked everybody for 5-minute compressed presentations, although in the future we will be able to expand and compress time, it seems, at our will. I'm going to ask the panel 3 questions, and then I'm going to open it up to everyone in the audience. If we can get the tape off this microphone, I'll be able to pass it around, because the one thing I'd like to happen here is at least for there to be a kind of open question to the panel, something that didn't happen in the original competition. Visionary utopias often assume a very immaterial idea of time. We project things into the future as if they were born instantaneously, already formed without there being any kind of evolutionary trajectory that's grounded in day-to-day life, or the incremental temporality of days, months, years. Given the endless debates around urban design and the almost, I would say, wholesale rejection in America of top-down urban design, and the replacement of this by a kind of ad hoc, anti-design, American democratic approach to urbanism. The best example, even though one of the ways of thinking how we clear ground for a new utopia is there will be a natural disaster. In the last 10 years, we've experienced 2 disasters, one not natural, in New York and in New Orleans, and realized even after that, that the ability for us to then sort of think new urban visions is incredibly difficult. What I wanted to ask the panel is that I'd like to know how each of you imagine the real material emergence of your urban visions. How does the first phase or the first piece of the hydronet system begin? What is the first location of the agricultural tower? Who makes that decision? How does it happen? So my first question is, what's the first step? Because that should be the question that we're asking if we're trying to think about how we make our future different. I think all of those microphones should be on, so please feel free.
We had a pretty obvious first step, which involved the earthquake, but the real first step for us was to think about what is changing in people's attitudes. That biology right now is pretty much where physics was 100 years ago, and that if we start to understand natural systems, that we actually start to see how they work, and we also start to see how we need to fit into the larger world. So the first thing was, we're going to have I think of one first step is that the water that San Francisco needs that comes from the Sierras there will be a big fight about the water, and we will start having a tremendous pressure on the city to say, okay, we need to use our own water. We need to use our own water, and the water that California needs for agriculture will stop in the Central Valley, and it will also be for wildlife. So in the big water war, I think that the pressure on technology to actually harvest the fog, to use living machines, to recharge the aquifers, to actually deal with water in a water cycle that keeps water where it is, will actually start to unpave the streets and cause these green blocks to start happening. My own block in the Sunset is already meeting about every other month to talk about, can we unpave parts of it and actually cut down on the amount of paving so that our block could actually have that stuff start to occur. So I think the first thing is that we start having all this pressure, and that we start saying, okay, we have solar power, we have wind power, we have water, and we have to use it where we get it, which is right here.
And for us, because we thought of the tunneling network as a distributed system, it wasn't assumed that it would have to happen at once. In comparison, say, to like Kenzo Tange's Tokyo Bay plan, where, that network could fill out, but it needs the big armature at the beginning to start, and hence the critique of all the kind of mega structure projects that followed. With ours, the rhizomatic nature of it, like a root system, we thought that the auto drilling kind of robotic technology that we presumed would allow it to grow as needed, but it would be the major connections solving the distribution of traffic, water, and power that would be the arteries that would begin, and how many capillaries or tertiaries grow from that would be open to change.
Who starts the system? Knowing how difficult it is to get a bicycle path changed in the street.
That's why if it's under the city, we also, in a slide that wasn't in here that we showed at the Ferry Building, was the famous freeway revolts, the plan. When they presented that plan to the public, it was a revolt against it because of its impact on the city as a top-down system. So we didn't assume there would be such a reaction to something essentially invisible, and that these above-ground conditions, or even some of the bigger underground nodes that we thought of as caves and outcroppings, a kind of new version of those urban caves and outcroppings, that those would be quite surgically inserted in a sense. They wouldn't be imposed from above.
You can slide it toward you if it doesn't come off.
So my sense of the first step of bringing the wilderness to the city is what happened in the 1970s with the peregrine falcon being at the brink of extinction and being brought to high-rise buildings in the city for their recovery. It was an incredible paradox at the time, and no one believed it would work. but the species, actually 50 cities participated. The species is no longer endangered. There's a pair that nest in San Francisco. There's a webcam that follows the birth of their offspring. And there seems to me to be a slow awakening of the sort of pleasure that wildlife, not in the context of a zoo, can bring to urban life. So that's one thing. The second is the kind of wake-up call that we get when the kind of thing that happened at the zoo happened. And then I have just been absolutely fascinated at One Rincon Tower and its presence and its proximity to the off-ramp of the Bay Bridge. I've had many arguments with friends about people who hate the building. I love the building because I see it as potentially the recognition that we don't keep buildings and highways separate from each other, but we actually start to use the highway as the defining sort of organizing element for new density in cities, that we start to compact ourselves into the zones that we've already outlined. So 3 things, 3 points of departure.
For us, it's interesting when you read the reports from the EPA and also Pacific Institute on the effects of global warming and also the rise in sea levels. And my curiosity is in strange bedfellows. I think that as we move forward and look at the kind of problems we're facing, there's going to have to be kinds of collaborations that are sort of unprecedented. And so when you look at developers and environmentalists collaborating together to make ambitious projects that serve the interests of all parties, I mean, there's going to be, just with a projected 3 feet rise in sea level, over $100 billion worth of lost developable real estate, but that doesn't, include the kind of story that's told, for environmentalists. So I think that, and it even appeared in this particular election how different parties gathered together behind different candidates and for what kinds of reasons and what kinds of problem solving. So that's a curious sort of start point for us.
Right, I'll have a go at it. I think for me, the starting point is really for each of us in our work to begin to investigate the non-vehicular paradigm, to look at ways that, when we think about bigger projects, when planning enterprises are undertaken, that we can begin the process of taking back that real estate and examine the degree to which the automobile drives our thinking about urbanism and begin to re-examine that. And I think there are actually a number of interesting experiments going on about that in the world. Sevilla, I believe, just turned its city completely pedestrian in the center of the city, and there was a lot of concern that it would be a tremendous failure, and in fact it's been incredibly vital. So I mean, there are lots of ways that we can begin to look at that even on a small scale and understand how the paradigm will change as we can no longer all drive individual cars.
So I think for the vision that we had for San Francisco, the first step would be to really tap into the political activism and kind of social ambitions that the city has and come up with the underlying infrastructure that taps into that, but not try to define the forms and shapes of what this is going to be. So in a certain way, it's sort of a stealth introduction of the progress of the city. You find the parts that people aren't going to see but are going to agree on and get those underway and built, and then let the other parts develop in a more organically developed way. And then I wanted to suggest for Craig and Lisa that their first step, those were great first steps that Craig mentioned, but I think that the first step needs to be the application to the design review boards for your mushroom towers, so you can get those done in 100 years.
Does this one work? We actually decided that this was a great opportunity for the first tower to actually be a remodel as opposed to a new tower. And so imagine your least favorite high-rise in San Francisco. Imagine it's stripped bare to its infrastructure and then growing full of plants. So that's what we thought would be the first tower. And I won't tell you what building that is for me, but yeah.
That's great. In the interest of time, I'm only going to ask one more question and then open it up. One of the prevailing issues facing our global culture is the domination of organics by technics, where the pervasiveness, we could say, of technology, which is historically entailed the appropriation and instrumentalization of all natural matter, and by historically I mean modern, would ensure that this would ensure our own absorption into and potential domination by the very technologies that we created. Recently, as we can see in most of the works in the exhibition, we see that a new third choice has emerged, which avoids this double pitfall of saying either we have to accept blindly technological determinism or that we all have to become pre-technological Luddites. The third choice is what I'm going to refer to as a new synthetic nature, soft technology. I had referred to the Anderson project as a kind of cultural organicism. And this third choice, in this third choice, the traditional hierarchy is inverted, and technologies are now being used to amplify and animate rather than constrain and functionalize or discipline the dynamic potentials of natural matter. But in reality, these new syntheses still assume a kind of domination of design. The hydronet doesn't necessarily grow on its own. It has to be designed and put in place, etc., even if it takes the form of nature. Every time I looked at that project, I was thinking that I was like looking at crabgrass really close up. It supports a new technological infrastructure. Is this still a projection of the same pervasiveness of technology that the Third Life project claims to reject in a way? If we're still aggressively instrumentalizing, harvesting nature for our own use or consumption, are we changing our attitude toward the living? The idea that life would be improvisational, aleatory, meant to be lived, not functionalized, and are we changing our attitude toward our own consumption? I'd like to sort of throw this open to the panel in terms of trying to find out what their attitude is to this new relationship between nature and technology.
Well, that I think was at the heart of what was the most interesting thing for us in thinking about what 100 years might bring. And I think we thought of adaptation. We thought of the kinds of things. You saw the movie where he talks about Darwin predicting the 3-inch proboscis on a moth because of the 3-inch throat of an orchid. Adaptation is this wonderful way that we actually respond, living beings respond to the world we're actually in. And so I think that one of the things that will happen as global climate changes is that there will be no such thing as a native species anymore, because we've got all these changing environments, and that what we need to do is to begin to understand those changing environments, and that those changing environments need to link us with all of the wildlife, with the things that we eat, the things that we with the wildlife that creates the air that we breathe. And so in the sense that we need to understand the biosphere and we need to live within it, I think that we need to live within it as animals, and that our technology needs to help us to do that we can only do that in a way that is connected with all other animals. And that, in fact, we did say we're throwing out infrastructure. We said that it was too important, the ground was too important to fill it up with tunnels and pipes and things like that, that in fact the ground is what supports, a teaspoon of ground supports more beings than all of us, than all human beings on Earth, right? So the ground needs to be full of microbes and plants and water going in and water going out. And that, so So we said, okay, we're going to have to sort of unpave things, make that stuff important. The bay is too important to say that it's just for us to float around in and claim the edge of. The bay is the place where all the fish that are in the water are spawned. So I think that as we understand more, and as technology enables us to model complex systems so that we actually do understand them, then we actually begin to be able to take part in those complex systems, and then we can then create something that does have an ongoing possibility of survival.
So our approach obviously was to privilege the non-human and to make certain assumptions about how our sense of what our rights are relative to the planet might shift in a very positive way, and at the same time embracing technology. And the imagining the future, the if idea is also in a way questioning the future of our discipline itself and how might it change, how might it be initiated in different ways. But I actually I just want to tell a really short anecdote. There was a school teacher at the Ferry Building event who took one of our books back to her third grade class and read from it a little bit to them, and then had them write a story about the city of the future. Once the stories were written, a few days later, they invited me to come and show the presentation where the slides actually worked, by the way. And the kids then barraged me with questions. I've never seen such an animated audience. One of them had written about this future city where the coyotes were the earthquake monitors, and they would be, scurrying around, sort of tapping bells when there was an earthquake coming, because they were more tuned in to the rhythms of things than we are. And somehow the whole conversation with them ended up discussing the future of the polar bear. And we all very blithely assume that the air is getting warmer and the water is rising, and we can accept that as an urban condition. But to these kids, this animal that has nothing to do with urbanism became a much more pressing matter to talk about than the future of San Francisco. So it sort of put me in my place, and I just found it a very moving experience, and it caused me again to reflect on what we do sort of for our own needs and what else is out there.
I can probably speak for all the folks up here at this panel, is the research that was excavated for these different projects led us into many unique and surprising places. And so that question tends to touch upon probably a fair amount of research that really didn't quite make it into projects. I think ultimately we were looking at kind of larger expressions. But it just occurs to me as to what is the nature of site, and the site of intervention, or the site of cultural expression, or the site of transformation. And I think there is a kind of tradition for using the city as a location for where we invest transformation and expressions of cultural imperatives. And I see it in my son's kind of growth, that he gets all his culture from YouTube. He doesn't take this kind of top-down sort of spoon-fed shape to what he experiences. And so for us, there's this idea that maybe cities are not necessarily the location of these types of interventions. It becomes smaller and smaller, and the human body actually becomes the new city. And we were curious in some of our research about the transhuman subcultures, which is the kinds of celebration that there can be these exotic medical and technological transformations to accommodate and accomplish feats and forms that were unprecedented, but the relocation of site was actually a sort of a curious part of our research for that.
I think I'm completely excited about technology, and I really think that it has every potential to be a very positive element in our future. So in proposing the project that we did, part of our thought is that the technology 100 years from now is not going to be on the surface. We're not going to have, we're not going to look at a building and say, this is the retro future image of the 50s Jetsons idea. What we're going to see 100 years from now, if I could predict 20 years from now, that will be the style. We'll have the wind generation, the solar power panels, they'll be fetishized, particularly by San Francisco architects, I might add. But they'll be there front and center and fetishized as the face of architecture. But I don't think that's going to last very long. I think 100 years from now, those things are going to be embedded and accepted. They're going to be the norm. We're not going to have LEED rating systems to tell us what's a good building, what's a bad building. Those are going to be the absolute norm. It's going to be completely embedded. And the true role of architects is going to be able to really focus not on figuring out what to do with the technology, but how to make these buildings that are served by the technology and the city served by the technology into really great places for humans. So I think there will be kind of a new technologically supported humanism that comes about after the fetishized wave of technology that we're entering right now.
Thanks, Peter. On that note, is a great sort of ending comment. What I was going to suggest in the interest of time so that everybody could see the exhibition was that individuals, because the competitors and the teams are here, that you can all go out into the exhibition, ask people individually about the projects, and take a look at the work. I want to thank all of our panelists for amazing work and for allowing CCA to put up the exhibition. Once again, it'll be up until the 15th of February, and thank you all for coming.